What is the most terrifying thing about gambling? The answer to this question is far more complex and insidious than simply losing money or addiction. Financial collapse is merely the final outcome, and addictive behavior is only its external symptom. To probe its core, the true horror of gambling lies in its nature as a systematic attack on an individual's value system, a slow and thorough spiritual cancer. Its first target is the individual's belief in the intrinsic link between effort and reward. It uses radical randomness to mock and dismantle the value of labor, a value forged in the crucible of time. When the belief system a person relies on for survival begins to falter, a great void appears in their inner world. To fill this void, they unconsciously slide into a deeper abyss. This process follows a cold, almost predictable pattern. To understand how this malignancy develops, the best way is to observe a complete case. The experience of a man named Aries is a complete map of how a soul is chronically eroded. He was not a born gambler. For a very long time, he represented the solid, reliable, and hopeful individuals who are the backbone of our society. His story, therefore, carries a sobering and universal significance. At 36, Aries' life was like a meticulously constructed edifice. As a project manager at a tech company, his career was stable and orderly. In his family life, he played the roles of husband and father, building a warm home with his gentle wife and raising a daughter who was just learning to speak. A mortgaged apartment was not just his residence, but a fortress he had built through hard work to withstand the storms of life. The foundation of this edifice was a profound understanding of value. In his eyes, all gains had to be earned through equivalent effort. He savored the sense of accomplishment after completing a complex project because it represented weeks of his team's wisdom and sweat. He cherished the satisfaction of buying something for his family because it was the direct result of his diligent work. His life was securely supported by a precise network woven from effort, time, and reward, which gave him a sense of security, stability, and direction. A decade of his career had allowed him to accumulate over $1 million in savings. To him, this million was by no means a cold financial figure. It had warmth. It was a microcosm of 3,650 days and nights, a testament to countless hours of overtime, perseverance under pressure, and a commitment to his family's future. It was the physical embodiment of the values of his first half of life, the most crucial load-bearing wall in the entire edifice of his existence. He firmly believed that as long as he took one steady step at a time, this edifice could grow ever taller and stronger, sheltering his family from all winds and rain. He held a natural wariness and detachment toward randomness and luck, viewing them as uncontrollable, ethereal variables. A real life, he believed, must be built on certainty. However, even the most robust structure can suffer a systemic collapse from a single, tiny crack. For Aries, the appearance of this crack was utterly accidental and utterly fatal. Most descents do not begin with a deliberate decision, but with a trivial accident. It happened during a company retreat at a luxury resort that housed a legal casino. Under the influence of a collectivist atmosphere and the excuse of just relaxing, the company's paying, Aries stepped into that bizarre, dazzling world for the first time. A casino is a meticulously designed psychological environment. There are no windows, no clocks. Eternal lighting, a constant background noise of clashing chips and spinning roulette wheels, and a continuous supply of oxygen are used to blur one's sense of time and judgment. For someone like Aries, accustomed to a life of routine, everything here was filled with an unreal allure. His initial participation was passive and detached. With the mentality of, "I'll leave as soon as I lose the entertainment chips the company gave me," he placed his first bet. The result, he won. This victory brought a subtle psychological shock. The enormous disparity between input and output left him feeling dizzy. He had merely made a trivial choice, yet the return exceeded what he earned in a hard day's work. This experience drilled a tiny hole in his solid value system. Over the next few hours, a statistical phenomenon known as beginner's luck was misinterpreted by Aries' subjective consciousness as a kind of talent or intuition. He turned his initial stake of 10,000 into $500,000. When he held that flimsy check, he felt not just joy, but a tremor. The heaven rewards the diligent philosophy he had followed for the past 10 years seemed clumsy, almost laughable, in the face of this night's effortless gain. The devil never appears with fangs and horns. It always arrives cloaked in coincidence and good fortune, whispering softly. Aries returned to his daily life with the $500,000 and a profound shock to his system, but he was unaware that the crack had already appeared. He had personally pried open Pandora's box. In his spare time, he began to unconsciously relive the feeling of that night, the racing heart, the illusion of controlling fate. He started browse related online platforms, initially out of curiosity to research the patterns within. This is the classic gray area, the slide from entertainment to addiction. Individuals often use psychological defense mechanisms like "I'm in control," "I'm just playing around," and I know when to stop to numb themselves and rationalize their behavior. Aries told himself he was just trying to roll over his windfall profits. Even if he lost it all, it was no big deal, because it wasn't his hard-earned money to begin with. It was this no-big-deal mentality that became the first step on the road to ruin. Aries soon invested the $500,000 into an online betting platform. At first, he was extremely cautious, using small bets to test the waters. In the midst of winning and losing, he enjoyed that familiar, on-edge thrill. After a few back-and-forth sessions, his courage grew, and his perception of money began to numb. At the gambling table, a win or loss of 10 or 50,000 seemed like just a flickering number, completely detached from the real-world banknotes earned through sweat. The real turning point occurred late one weekend night. After a series of small losses, Aries had about 200,000 left in his account. A stubborn refusal to lose seized him. He decided to make one big bet, either win back his losses or quit for good. He wagered the entire remaining 200,000 on a hand that seemed to have an extremely high probability of winning. Time seemed to stand still. He could hear his heart pounding against his chest, blood rushing to his head, his fingertips cold. When the page displayed victory, and his account balance instantly doubled, a huge, almost suffocating pleasure washed over him. He did not stop there. Driven by the euphoria of this near-death escape, he pressed his advantage. Over the next hour, luck descended like a miracle. His account balance soared from 400,000 to $1.5 million. 1 hour, $1.5 million. This number was like a giant hammer, smashing down on the edifice of Aries' life, the one named value. He stared blankly at the screen, a single thought echoing in his mind. His entire savings from the past 10 years amounted to just this much. His decade of diligence, his early mornings and late nights, his discipline and prudence, couldn't compare to an hour of frantic clicking. This was a devastating psychological experience. After the initial shock came an uncontrollable sense of imbalance and nihilism. His past belief in effort was completely subverted, even rendered a joke. He began to doubt his entire way of life, shaking the foundations of every principle he had ever held dear. If money could be obtained so easily, then what was the point of work? What was the value of struggle? This violent distortion of values is the core poison of gambling. It causes a person to belittle, even despise, the normal methods of wealth accumulation in the real world. For the salaried class, a monthly paycheck becomes trivial. For entrepreneurs, the profits earned by appeasing clients and chasing deals become tedious and inefficient. A thought, like a cancer cell, began to multiply wildly in Aries' mind. Is there anything in this world that makes money faster or easier than gambling? When this thought completely conquered his mind, the most crucial load-bearing wall of his life's edifice, his belief in the value of labor, had been quietly removed. The entire structure, though still intact on the outside, was already crumbling from within. Getting rich overnight did not bring Aries lasting happiness. Instead, it pushed him into a deeper black hole of emptiness. A fierce war began to rage within him. On one side was the demon of desire, roaring in his ear. Keep going. You can win more. You can leave this ordinary life behind and become someone great. On the other side were the remnants of reason, the old, grounded Aries, faintly warning him. Stop. This is luck. It can't last forever. There's no such thing as a free lunch. The constant struggle between desire and reason created immense mental friction, eventually carving out a vast, unfillable wasteland in his heart. He could no longer find satisfaction in work and family as he once did. When he sat in his office dealing with tedious emails and meetings, he felt it was all suffocatingly dull, a waste of time. He couldn't concentrate at all. His mind was consumed with the turn of the cards and how to place his next bet. He started taking frequent leave from work and became neglectful of his duties. The once dedicated project manager was now the most disengaged member of the team. His colleagues sensed the change, but no one knew the reason behind it. His wife also noticed something was wrong. Aries became erratic and moody, showing impatience over small family expenses, like buying a slightly more expensive pair of shoes for their daughter, yet at other times, he would suddenly bring home expensive and impractical luxury items. He no longer shared stories from work or showed interest in planning for the family's future. He was like a ghost. His body was at home, but his soul had drifted to another dimension. Their communication dwindled, while their arguments grew more frequent. To escape this inner void and the tense family atmosphere, Aries chose the most direct form of anesthesia, extravagance. He began frequenting high-end restaurants and exclusive clubs, building a false facade of a high-society life with money. He reveled in the flattery of waiters and the envious gazes of his friends, mostly new acquaintances from the gambling table. He used the fleeting pleasure of alcohol and consumption to numb his ever-expanding emptiness. He fell in love with this feeling of spending money like water, as it made him feel like he was still in control. However, after every binge, a deeper void would engulf him like a tide. He knew better than anyone that the only way to maintain this false glamour was to keep gambling, to keep winning. The last straw that broke the camel's back was his addiction to this lavish lifestyle. He could no longer return to his old, simple, authentic life. Desire had finally and completely crushed reason. His life was now bound to the out-of-control chariot of the gambling table, with no choice but to press forward. When a person is no longer gambling to win money, but to maintain the feeling that winning brings, their fall enters an irreversible fast lane. Aries returned to the table, but this time, his mindset was completely different. He was no longer a beginner just playing around, but a gambler burdened with immense psychological pressure. He needed to win. He had to win. However, the laws of gambling never bend to individual will. Murphy's Law began to take effect, and the prelude to losing slowly began. Stage 1, the calm loss. At first, he was only losing a portion of his winnings. He could still calmly tell himself, "It's fine. This was all house money anyway. It doesn't hurt to lose it." This is the most common self-comforting lie among gamblers. They psychologically classify winnings as unearned income to lessen the pain of loss. But in reality, once money enters an account, there is no dirty or clean money. The loss is real. Stage 2, the panic chase. When he had lost all his winnings and began to dip into his own $1,000,000 principal, true panic set in. The first piece of his principal he lost, even if it was just 10,000, delivered a psychological blow far greater than losing 100,000 of his windfall. Because that was the crystallization of his 10 years of life. In his panic, his judgment deteriorated rapidly, and he fell into the typical loss-chasing mode. He started increasing his stakes, trying to win it all back in one go, but the hole only got deeper. Reason was now completely useless, replaced by a primal, stubborn impulse. Stage 3, the uncontrolled borrowing. Soon, his decade of savings, that $1,000,000, was exhausted in a series of last-won bets. At this point, a normal person not fully controlled by addiction would feel a bone-deep fear and stop. But Aries could not turn back. He could not accept the fact that a decade of struggle had vanished into thin air. For him, admitting failure was worse than death. Only one thought remained in his mind: win it back. To raise funds, he began to lie. He borrowed money from his parents and relatives, claiming he needed it for his business. He maxed out all his credit cards and applied for various high-interest online loans. He even secretly mortgaged the apartment he co-owned with his wife. He became a masterful liar, weaving one lie after another for his closest loved ones. His relationships, his credit, his very character were pawned away in this process. Chapter 4, the total collapse. He was alone in a cheap motel room, his eyes bloodshot, staring intently at his phone screen. The money he had scammed from friends and family, borrowed from loan sharks, and secured against his home, disappeared like water in this final frenzy. His hands trembled uncontrollably, his body drenched in a cold sweat. He was no longer gambling to win, or even to break even. He was just mechanically, numbly repeating the action of placing a bet. Gambling at this point had nothing to do with winning or losing. It had become a ritual of self-destruction. When the account balance showed zero and all lines of credit were exhausted, it was over. There was no dramatic scream, only a dead silence. The phone slipped from his limp hand and fell onto the carpet. Aries sat frozen, like a statue whose soul had been ripped out. What he had lost was far more than just money. He had lost a decade of savings, his home, the love and trust of his family, his friends, his job, and his dignity as a human being. He had lost the man he once was, the man who was grounded, who believed in hard work. The edifice of his life, at this moment, had completely collapsed, reduced to dust and smoke. Only after hitting rock bottom, violently awakened by the cold, hard reality, did Aries realize the catastrophic mistake he had made. However, realization does not mean redemption. The tragedy of a gambler lies in the fact that they often fall into an unsolvable paradox. Paradox 1. If you lose, you want to win it back. If you win, you want to win more. For Aries, who had lost everything, he could not accept an ending where it was just over. The immense sense of loss from a decade of his life evaporating in such an absurd way would transform into an obsession, driving him to win it back at any cost. This is the demon shared by all gamblers. But let's conduct a thought experiment. What if fate smiled on him again, allowing him to miraculously win back everything he had lost, and more? Would he stop then and return to a normal life? The answer is almost certainly no. A man who couldn't handle $1,000,000 win with the rationality he had when earning 100,000, how could he possibly resist the immense temptation of winning back several million with the desperation of having lost everything? He would only solidify a more dangerous belief in his mind. See, I really can solve my problems with gambling. He would become even more superstitious about his luck and ability, sliding into an even deeper abyss. This is tantamount to using a finite life to fill an infinite black hole of desire. Paradox 2. In the world of gambling, there are no true winners. Even if a person could win forever, like a legendary god of gamblers, they would have already lost the most precious things in life. They would become a complete spiritual prisoner. They would live in a state of perpetual anxiety. Before every bet, they would be tormented by the fear of losing. After every win, they would be gnawed at by the anxiety of how to protect these winnings and how to win more. They cannot enjoy the peace that money brings, because every cent is tainted with uncertainty. They would be swallowed by a huge sense of emptiness. When the acquisition of money becomes detached from labor and creation, money itself loses its meaning, becoming a pile of hollow numbers. They cannot derive true achievement or happiness from it. They would become completely disconnected from the real world, living as an island. They cannot resonate with people who work and live normally, nor can they reintegrate into real social relationships. They would become suspicious, paranoid, and agitated, forever spinning in the vortex of win and lose, until their spirit is completely worn out and exhausted. Therefore, a gambler's endgame is never determined by winning or losing. As long as they are at the table, win or lose, they have already lost. They have lost their inner peace, their ability to perceive happiness, and their sense of belonging as a social being. Ares' story is nearing its end here. His final fate was to be hounded by loan sharks, completely abandoned by his family, wandering the corners of the city. He often thinks of his former self, the man who worked hard in the office, who picked out fruit for his wife at the market, who hugged his daughter in the living room. That self now seems so distant, like the past life of another person. Gamblers are always repeating yesterday's mistakes while fantasizing about a miracle to redeem them tomorrow. The only thing they forget is that the only thing that can be controlled is today. They desperately pursue what others casually squander, money, while recklessly squandering what others desperately crave, time, family, trust, and health. The core of this tragedy has never been about money, but about the loss of passion. When a person loses passion for work, for creation, for family, for the real life that requires time and heart to cultivate, they have already lost their core human drive. Gambling, by providing a false, cheap, and instant stimulation, systematically destroys this precious passion. So where is true redemption? It is not in the outcome of the next bet, not in any fantasy of winning it back. It exists only in a simple yet immensely courageous act, turning around and walking away. When a gambler finally understands that what he needs to save is not his wallet, but his heart that has grown numb to life, when he is finally willing to give up the fantasy of a shortcut and re-embrace the value of effort and time, when he finally has the courage to face the devastating reality and resolves to rebuild his life brick by brick from the ruins, only at that moment will redemption truly begin. Happiness is never found in the win or loss at the gambling table. It is found in the single thought you have the moment you turn away and re-embrace the real world.